Well, welcome back to Barley and Hops. I'm George. Yes, I am your humble host and excited to be here with you as always. Our intent is to unlock the mysteries of home distilling, and we're here to help unlock one more. You're going to enjoy this. We're going to talk about clarification. Now that you've made it through the introduction and our quick title, we want to get right to the meat of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about clarification because we all know that once we create a mash or a wash, those terms are interchangeable. You can use them however you like. A wash is primarily sugar, water, and a mash, which is a noun as well as a process, verb, something you're doing is really more reserved for grains, cereals, and water. Okay? But the terms are interchangeable. People know what you're talking about. As long as you know what you're talking about, that's all we care about. So, let's move on. You know that the clearer and cleaner that you enter the still, the clearer and cleaner you will exit the still, which is our way of trying to avoid, scorching. And you can scorch regardless of what type of heat source you use, but when you have a lot of solid particulates and a bunch of stuff rumbling around in there, and you're not keeping it moving, which would require an agitator, there are stills that are oil jacketed that heat collectively across the outside, and I'm getting off track here, but they also have an agitator that keeps everything moving, that you can actually have the grain inside the still and distill in that manner. But most of us are using direct heated or direct fired stills. And in that particular case, anything you put in there, any solid particulates are going to settle. And when they settle and touch the source of your heat, what do? Yes, they do. They burn, which is called scorching. And that really does create a nasty taste that will make its way throughout your spirit. And we don't want that to happen. So what we want to do is we want to clarify. And this is the step after fermentation. Now remember, before you do any clarification, the one thing you need to do after fermentation, and you have validated and verified that fermentation has completed, before you go to your clarifying step, what do we have to do? Yep. No. Yeah, you in the back. Get with the program. We have to degas. Why do we degas? We degas so that all of the CO2 that's resident inside here, because what happens during fermentation is that one of the byproducts of your yeast creating alcohol is they sort of pass out CO2. And that CO2 will start to lock itself with some of those water molecules, and it'll become trapped. And over a period of time, it builds up, and it's like having a Coke, or a Sprite is an easy one. You put Sprite, pour it in a glass, and sit back and watch it, and you'll see CO2 escaping. Trust me, it doesn't want to be in there in the first place. So it's trying to get out, and it'll rise up to the top and pop off. Well, what'll happen in your wash or your mash is that it'll start to rise, but it gets captured. And so you'll have all this CO2 floating around in there. And what happens whenever you try to clarify, anything you use to clarify will be captured by that floating CO2. So you'll start having layers, and or you'll have no clarification whatsoever. So make sure you degas. You degas a couple of different ways. In this particular case with these jars, and these may be familiar, I used these on a video we did for, and the very same ones that we did for using sugar and verifying how much sugar goes into, points per gallon per pound, points per pound per gallon. Gravity points per pound per gallon. There we go. Yeah. So I'm using the same ones. The easiest way to get rid of that CO2 in those was to just shake them real hard and open the top, close it, shake it real hard, open the top, let all of it escape, close it until you get all the CO2 out. You could also use a drill with a whip on the end of it. You can open up the top of your fermenter. You can use a big whisk and you can just start whipping. But you need to find a way to get rid of all that CO2. With me so far? we're there. Okay, so we have degassed. Now what we want to do is we want to remove, and we want everything in there to drop out to the bottom. What other methods we can use? Well, the very first one is the one that's always works in our favor, and it's natural. It's called gravity. Yes, over a period of about 2 weeks, sometimes maybe 3 weeks, depending on the amount and the size, gravity will cause all of your solid particulates to settle down to the bottom. Okay, and it will leave you with a clear mash or wash. That's one way. But of course, anytime we do something, we're always looking for an easier way to do it, or a method in which to get there a little bit quicker. So we use what we call fining agents. And these fining agents are plentiful. Okay, a couple that I don't have with me, one of them is bentonite. Bentonite is really a clay, but it's a really good clay, and it's really compact and small, crushed. And what this clay does is it absorbs water first, it expands, and it starts to drop because it's very heavy. It has a really high molecular mass. So it drops, and when it does, it captures particles and it drops down to the bottom. So that's bentonite. Bentonite does that very well. It's not really messy to use, but it works extremely well. I just don't happen to have any because I don't normally use it. It's really popular in wines. Now, we have another product called sparkaloid. And sparkaloid is a white powder, and you use that, you mix it up with a little bit of water, and you make a slurry out of it and pour that in, and it does exactly the same thing. It's just sold under the name sparkaloid. Of course, we have, well, my favorite, which is the Turbo Clear, and the Turbo Clear is, well, also you have Insaglass. Insaglass is an extract from a dried fish bladder, and it's primarily used in beer brewing, and you just add that to your mash, and voila, things settle down to the bottom. The one that, my favorite is Keosol and Cheetah Sand, and it's made in Turbo Clear, and we'll get to that. Now, we'll do that right now. It's a two-part. You have part A, you have part B. Excuse me. Part A is 1 ounce. It's okay. We're going to talk about a 6-gallon batch. Okay, this is good for up to 6 gallons. Part A is 20 milliliters or 0.7 ounces, and Part B is right at 85 or so milliliters, which is 3 ounces. So you have Keosol and Cheetah Sand, and these are positively, negatively charged, and they are made from extracts from shellfish. So, but although if you have a shellfish allergy, this should not affect that at all. It's an extract. And additionally, if you're going to use this, you can also buy it in the large bottles, and just it's a lot more economic if you just buy big bottles of it. And here's the name: Keosol and Cheetah Sand, or Cheetah Sand, however you want to pronounce it. But these are the two chemicals that you use together. You use part A, and then you wait 45 minutes or so, and then you put in part B. And within 24 to 48 hours, everything drops down to the bottom and you're crystal clear. Everybody doesn't have access to that. And oh, by the way, remember, this is a 1-to-3 ratio. Keosol is 1 ounce, 0.7 is close enough. 1 ounce, and Cheetah Sand is 3 ounces. So that is your 1-to-3 ratio when you use those two chemicals together. Now, in these 3 jars I have in front of me, I wanted to show this to you because this is another solution other than what we've already discussed. This is a one pound of sugar and 1 gallon of water equivalent, okay, that we did earlier. You'll notice that it's crystal clear. It has already finished fermenting because this was over 2 weeks ago, and I still got this jar sitting around, so when I open it up, it smells like alcohol. It's got about 4% alcohol by volume. And all of the CO2 has escaped. I shook it. So all the CO2 has escaped. You can see it's crystal clear, and for lack of better words. This is a jar, and it's still cold, and that's why it's a little hazy, because anytime that you chill a fermented mash or wash, those long chain fatty acids will become visible and then when it warms up, it will start to clear out. And then I have this one here as well. Now these are two equivalents because remember we did an adjustment to these. We added more water to them in order to bring down the levels of sugar so we could work with our points, gravity points per pound per gallon. Or actually, yeah, that's what it was. So we got these about equivalent, but that's not what we were interested in. I was interested in the clarification process. So I degassed both of them, a simple shake several times to get all the CO2 out. And then what I did was I introduced another product. And I'm going to show you this. And now there's a guy in the back sitting there right now going, boom, I got it. He's going to shut the video off. And from now on, he's going to use Jell-O. And you're going to be rudely, you're already gone, so it doesn't matter. You're going to be rudely disappointed because I'm showing this, I'm holding this up as an example of what not to use. Okay? Gelatin is what we're looking for. Jell-O is gelatin. But remember that there's 32 grams of sugar in here as well. So what's going to happen if I add Jell-O to any one of these? You better believe it. I've already got yeast in there because you can't get rid of that. And I'm going to feed them again. And guess what they're going to do? Yep, they're going to start fermenting. And then guess what the byproducts are? Aside from the ethanol is going to be CO2 that you've already shook out and tried to get rid of so you could clarify. You've taken 3 steps backwards. All right, so do not use your flavored Jell-O because it already has, some of them have 32, some of them have 39 grams of sugar already added to it. And it's just not a good product for what we're looking for. They have a product called unflavored gelatin, which has 0 grams of fat, 0 grams of protein, 0 grams of sugar. It's nothing more than just gelatin. And this will work in a pinch. But there's 2 ways to use it. And I wanted to show you this because this is the demonstration. This is the example of what I have as the results of what we went through. Now this comes in a small box. This cost me 89 cents at my local Walmart. Here's another one. It's made by Knox. Knox makes a gelatin as well. And they're made by many, many different names. So choose the one you want. As long as it's unflavored and not sugared. You can bet your bottom dollar if it's unflavored, it doesn't have any sugar in it because that's just the way it is. You got 4 little packs inside there, and this is a 7-gram pack. So you've got a total of 4 1/4 ounce or 7-gram satchels in here. And I used 1 in this jar, and I used 1 in this jar. 4 of these is more than enough. Actually, 2 of these will probably do you really good at a 5-gallon batch. The way I used this was the right way, the right method, and I also used the printed instructions method, which is something what men normally do is you never read the instructions. When all else fails, then you read the instructions. So follow along. What I did was I opened up this jar and I sprinkled the gelatin on top and just allowed it to sit there. And then I closed the jar. And I allowed that gelatin to soak up all that water and become a glob. Well, that glob did exactly what I had expected it to do. It fills up and it started to drop. And it dropped all the way down to the bottom. And you'll notice, you can see the level of sediment that I have here. That's 2 things. One, it's all the things that it drug out and settled down to the bottom, but additionally, it's a big glob of gelatin, which can be problematic. Just think of this in the long term, down the road. If I have that much in this small quart jar, can you imagine what that's going to do to my fermenter? I'm actually sacrificing a pretty large space because what I don't want to do is I don't want to siphon this out and put this into the still for obvious reasons. Okay, now what I did with this one is I did it the correct way, which is I took a 1/2 cup of water. I followed the direction. That's all I had to do. Poured this in, stirred it, let it set for about 2 minutes, and then I introduced a 1/2 cup of hot water, actually boiling water in there. And what that does is it gets the gelatin to start to liquefy and gets it set up in its proper form so that it can work in your favor. And then I just introduced that. I added that to this jar and closed the jar and allowed that to set. Now, if you look at this one, look closely, and you can see way at the very bottom here, I've probably got about, maybe 1/8 of an inch. I can see, if you look really close, I can see about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of gelatin. And it's sitting down on top of all that sediment, so everything in it drug out all the way down. And so this is clear. All I have to do is siphon things off the top. So remember, you can use gelatin. Make sure you use unflavored gelatin, or you can use a Kesa salt cheetah sand. You can use a sparkaloid. You can use bentonite. There's one other method. It's called cold crashing. And when you cold crash, and of course these two, I put them in the refrigerator because according to the instructions, you have to chill it in order for that to solidify, and then it's heavy and it falls. And that's why you can see some of the fatty acids that are still located in there. You can also do what we call cold crashing if you have a device large enough, like a chest freezer. You can put a large 5-gallon fermenter into a chest freezer, and you can cold crash it. Because what happens there is that the temperature causes all of your acids, all your fatty acids to solidify, clump together. They become heavy, they drop everything else, and it pulls everything else with it. So that's one way of clarifying. That can take anywhere from 24 to 36 hours. Very simple and very direct. So I hope you've enjoyed this part. Now, there's one other thing that I want to discuss before we go away. I wanted to share this with you because I get so many messages about hand sanitizer. Folks, when we make hand sanitizer, we know what the recommendation is for the level of alcohol by volume in the final product, okay? And that's 60% or higher. 60% alcohol by volume or higher in your final product, hand sanitizer. So that means that you have to produce out of your still, you're going to have to produce a minimum. If you were going to use it at 100% strength, you're going to have to produce 120 proof. We produce normally 140 proof in a pot still. And that's a pretty good draw, but sometimes it's a little bit lower than that. So a pot still is not the solution for making ethanol to make hand sanitizer. It really requires a certain amount of what they call rectification or reflux. Because the higher the proof you start with, of course, the more medium you can put in the aloe gel or the glycerin or baby oil, or the more of that you can add to it in order to help use that to spread that around. If you use a pure ethanol, ethanol will evaporate too quickly and becomes non-effective. It'll also dry your skin out. I hope that clarifies that, because those questions are coming in dozens at a time. And I understand, but we've got to do this. If we're going to do it, we've got to do it right. Happy distilling.